Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is a New York Times bestselling author known for her fantasy and young adult rom-coms. Please welcome Olivie Blake, aka Alexene Farol Follmuth. Did I get it? Oh, I hope I got it.
No, it's
Oh,
okay.
all right.
It's Alexene, but it's
I thought that's
fine.
what I
It's
said.
been
That's not what I said.
no, it's been mispronounced for like my whole life. I really wish, since I already use one pseudonym, I should have just made it Alexis or something that other people. I'm actually named after a soap opera character.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
named after Alexis Carrington on Dynasty. And my mom just decided she was going to make it not quite that. And I've always wished she did not make that decision.
Can I
So
blame my
anyway,
Minnesota accent and say that was the reason because I'm from Minnesota
I
and it's an
I will
accent issue?
accept that.
Okay. Okay.
My husband's family, much of my husband's family is in Minnesota, and that's not really relevant except to say hello.
All right. So first off, it's always fascinating to me of the stories because we're talking about multiple names here. What
Yes,
what is the story between the two names?
yes. So, where to start with this? So, I'm the daughter of an immigrant, and being a writer was not a real career. That was really not on the table for me. If I had told my mother I was going to be like an English major, that wouldn't just simply would not have happened.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of my life trying not to be a writer or trying to, I guess, fight against my like more artistic impulses and the things that I was drawn to but knew weren't practical. And so my background is in social science. I have a degree in urban planning and I have a master's in planning. And then I went to law school because I really didn't like urban planning. Sometimes with academia, the job is very, very different from like what you learn. And anyway, so dropped out of law school. I was just really not happy. I was feeling very emotionally drained. I worked for the Cook County Public Defender's Office, and it's just very hard. I think I was looking for a way, as many people who go to law school are doing. I was looking a way to do some good, but lawyers are much more limited than you think. They have to basically fill in the blanks with what already exists and can't actually change something if it's not a good law. So I was pretty frustrated. I dropped out of law school. I did not know what I was going to do next. I was doing like freelance graphic design. Fell back on my urban planning degree to work in commercial real estate. And then one day, my psychiatrist didn't refill my pills, and I was awake for like 3 days.
Oh
And
wow.
so I discovered fanfiction.net at like 2 in the morning, and I was like, "Whoa, this exists! Great! I'm gonna make this everybody else's problem." And just started writing fan fiction. I used a random like name generator to invent a username for myself, which turned out to be quite savvy actually, because most people on fanfiction.net are using like little nicknames as opposed to a fake name.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the more I started to write, the more I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. This
Yeah.
is why my brain always defaults to art. This is what I want to do. Is I want to be creative, and I want to make. I want to create.
Right.
And so I started my real goal, because I don't I it's very possible to make money self-publishing. I always like to begin with that. You don't need Your pathway to publishing can look a lot of different ways, and there is no correct way to become a published author. But I did not want to be a self-published author because I don't like. To me, the production process is tedious. I just want to write my little stories. I don't want to worry about sub rights or audio or anything like that.
Yeah.
So if you want to self-publish, while that has a great degree of creative freedom, it also you have to enjoy running your own business, and that
Right.
is not ever anything I wanted to do. So I tried to be traditionally published. I queried, I think, three manuscripts very seriously, things that I felt like could be right for the market, and then any ideas I had that were definitely not right for the market, like according to agents who said no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those I just self-published because I was like, well, I've got this fan fiction audience. I've got like 300 best friends or something
Yeah.
that will
Just get
buy
it
this
out there, right?
story. Yeah, yeah, just make it available, because the last thing I want is for it to die on my hard drive.
Right.
So like Masters of Death is my great example for that, because when I wrote it in 2017, we were still in the oversaturation of like Twilight and paranormal
Right.
romances. And
Yeah.
so people were like, we do not want vampires right now. Like, just don't send it. It'll be deleted unread. I was like, okay, so this is the kind of story I'm going to self-publish. I tried to do like a writing competition for One for My Enemy. That didn't work out, and I didn't get any feedback at all. So I was like, okay, well then maybe this one isn't right either. And just kept like, because I'm very prolific from a place of mental illness, I just everything that wasn't right for publishing, I would just self-publish. And so by the time I self-published the Atlas 6, I'm skipping ahead a little.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll get around.
By the
We'll
time I
bounce around. That's
yeah,
okay.
by the time I self-published the Atlas 6, I it was like my ninth self-published book. And then shortly after, I had an idea that I was like, I think this is a good idea for the market. It's young adult, which I had not written up until that point. But it was like, my husband is a physics teacher, and he asked me to make science, specifically physics, appealing to young women, because he
Okay.
was saying that like he has a lot of students who underestimate themselves. They're like, well, I'm just not that kind of girl. Like, I'm not a math and science girl. And he's
Yeah.
like, that's ridiculous. Like, you're perfectly capable of grasping the subject matter, and there's no reason for you to think this is not your thing.
Yeah.
It was one of, I think it was one of his first years teaching, and he just like had not worked with young women before and didn't really understand something that I understood intuitively, which is that like the world shows you the exit doors when you're a young woman, and these spaces that are usually reserved for men.
Right.
So yeah, so I was like, okay, this is actually like, the rom-com market was pretty strong, the YA market was pretty strong. I was like, not to say you can't ever really write to the market. Like, publishing doesn't know what the
Right.
market is, and Book Talk proved that. But I was like, this is a concept that I think an agent could be into. And it was. I got my agent very quickly, and we went on sub, and it sold very quickly. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm a young adult author now. But I didn't want to, like, I hugely value the community of fandom, and I didn't want to take my fan works away. Like, I didn't want Olivie Blake to disappear. And so I was like, these audiences should not necessarily overlap, because Olivie writes for adults and Alexene writes for teenagers. So that's why I split it up and used my real name. Not that anyone questioned it at the time, because the Atlas 6 hadn't gone viral yet.
Yeah.
So then fast forward a little bit more to about a year later, the Atlas 6 has gone viral. At this point, my young adult novel, My Mechanical Romance, like, is already very much in the works, but still is not coming out until
Yeah.
later. And so at that point, people were trying to convince me to like use, like, try to make people understand that I was the same person. I was like, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Just because as a female author, as a woman of color, people often make the assumption that I write for children, like, oh, you can't possibly be taken seriously, and so you must be a young adult writer. So I wanted it to not be confusing, that like, okay, Olivie always writes for adults, Alexene always writes for teens. If
Okay.
that's the name on the book, then that's who the audience is. And so yeah, I think that all of my publishers would have preferred to just like, I love my publisher at Tor. I love everyone on my team, truly. But still, publishing as an industry like has dollar signs in their eyes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they're like, well, Olivie Blake is worth money and Alexene isn't, so maybe we don't want to do that. And I was like, well, you're gonna have to give me this one.
That's fascinating, because there are so many authors where the publishers are like, you should probably have a second name for this, when they change genres, when they change to YA, or when they change those different things. Oftentimes the people that I have on say that the publishers suggest change your name, have a different name, keep them separate.
Yeah, that is usually, though, I will say, that is usually when like, sometimes publishers need to rebuild an author, or they want to like build up an audience. And in this case, they were trying to take an audience and like shift them to this other subject matter and other book. And I was just like, you can't just do that, though, because this is not the right material for them.
Yeah.
When I'm writing for a teenage audience, the only real difference is that it's who I'm talking to, like who I'm telling the story to. You could obviously, an adult could read my YA works, and I think an experienced teen reader, like a teen reader who reads a lot, could also read my adult works.
Right.
But that's not my job to make that decision. Like, I don't want to market it as if it's for just for anyone universally. So I try to, the difference is like, who am I talking to? Who's in the imaginary chair next to me. Whose story is this for?
Right. Let's rewind a little bit. Let's go to the beginning.
Yeah,
You're a kid, you're young. Were
sure.
you
Yes.
into writing as a kid?
Yeah, I actually won a couple of writing competitions when I was younger. And again, it was a thing that was like, well, that's fun. It's nice to have hobbies.
Yeah.
But I was a huge reader. I'm pretty excited that this weekend at Rose City Comic Con, I met Terry Brooks, and I have all of his books just on my childhood bookshelf, and he was telling me how much he loved the Atlas series, and I was like, I don't even understand what's happening to me. Like I'm blacking out a little bit.
That goes to a little
Yeah,
bit of what we were talking about earlier, right?
yeah,
Before we went
yeah,
live.
yeah, yeah. The whole there's just such a crazy feeling when you realize like who could be a reader anyway. It's very surreal, and um, so I was a huge science fiction and fantasy reader. I would basically, and I'm also like I like to emphasize I'm an indoor cat, so like during the summers I would check out like 15 books a week, and that was my week, and
Yeah.
then just go back and do it again. And I would take books like just whatever was in that section. So I read a lot of series out of order. Um, it was just like just consuming as much as I possibly could, and I'm really built on a foundation of like Terry Pratchett and Lemony Snicket and Neil Gaiman and Douglas Adams, and so it's been very interesting to be built on what is predominantly, I would say, like male authors, like male science fiction and fantasy authors, with of course notable exceptions: Diana Wynne Jones, Tamora Pierce, Patricia C. Reed. But and then now to be surrounded by so many extremely talented female authors, and to just really feel like when you're in the big leagues, you've got these amazing, intelligent women around you, and the way that it has changed how we tell those stories and what kind of stories we tell.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And the way I think it's marketed to the audience as well is a little bit shifted as well. Because
Yeah, well,
you have so many great female authors that have a perspective that they are willing and fully capable of sharing, but there's an audience there that's like, I want to see those perspectives. I want to see what they put down on paper, and that's refreshing and new.
yeah, people have a lot of criticisms about book talk. Fair enough. The TikTok algorithm is problematic. But what book talk proves is that the audience that publishing reaches is different than publishing thinks it is. Like publishing doesn't understand how diverse its readership actually is.
Yeah.
And it hasn't, like, publishing itself is not as diverse as its actual readership. And so book talk is a way for publishing and multiple industries, the music industry as well, to see in real time what they're missing about what people are interested in and what people are passionate about. And so I will always be very grateful, because book talk, which is what made the Atlas 6 blow up, is it's the same thing that has always worked in publishing, which is word of mouth. Word of mouth is the only thing that really sells books.
Yeah.
And TikTok is so good at it because the likelihood of virality is much higher on TikTok than on any other platform.
Right.
So yeah, just something I like to bring up, because I sometimes I have to just like, I'm just fully crowdsourced, I'm not a thing that publishing would have put money into if there wasn't already money on the table,
Well,
like
and
if there was not already value.
My favorite part about that whole thing, and we'll just jump right into that, is that all happened, and it wasn't like you weren't pushing that narrative, right?
No.
You weren't. Do you even have a TikTok account?
No,
at this?
no.
Yeah.
I know.
So like that happened without your
TikTok.
influence whatsoever. You were just there, and you were just like, hey, we're selling a bunch of stuff. By the way, you're going viral online, and you're like, what? am I getting that story right?
Yeah, no, yep, that's exactly right. I was actually in labor when things started to go viral, and it was my husband too, because I was in labor for like 2 days. I don't recommend childbirth to you. The aftermath is great, but the actual process is not awesome. So yeah, my husband was quite bored, and he was looking at my KDP numbers and just like, oh, something's happening here. Like, so like the Atlas 6 is selling like crazy. What did you do differently? And I was like, I'm here. I'm doing nothing. I don't even know where my phone is. At that point, like I was so pregnant and so miserable. It had been probably a couple of months before I was like a couple of months of just being very offline. And so yeah, I truly had nothing to do with it, except for the two things I will take credit for. Obviously, I wrote the book.
Right.
But the other thing is that my longtime collaborator, Lil Kimura, has always done my interior illustrations. And so if I had one like true genius thing, it was getting her to do the art, because then when this platform that was predominantly visual took off, my book was obviously a great one because for so long books did not have illustrations in them.
Right.
So I have like terrible imposter syndrome. I am constantly trying not to question whether or not I deserve to be here or if I'll just fall off, you know, the cliff. But I do think that thanks to the success of my books and the illustrations that are in them, many more books put emphasis on art and on the book as an artistic product,
Yeah.
and I'm very happy to see that.
Yeah. That's awesome. How did that change your life going forward? Obviously, like, did you have a plan? This is what I'm going to do. These are the books I have planned coming up after, after you have a kid, or was it like, we're just going to set that stuff aside and work on being a mom, or what?
So I got my first traditional publishing deal, and the advance was it was about $35,000, which is typical for it was a small house, debut title, priority title, and that's like a pretty good deal. And at that point, I was like, okay, I knew, like, in my head, I had prepared myself to like crawl my way forward, just like I'm going to be a writer. It is the only thing that I can accept. I've tried other jobs, I've tried other careers. It doesn't work for me. My brain just breaks. This is
Yeah.
the only thing I can do and like feel good and feel alive doing. And thankfully, I had a partner. I always feel like basically, with those kinds of numbers, you can't quit your job and write full time unless you have a partner or you have family money or whatever. So my husband, he was like, okay, if you just bring in like that much money, like we'll survive, we'll be fine. And so that's when we decided it was okay to have a baby. And so when, because I had signed as a young adult author, I was like, well, I guess I'm a young adult author. Now I have to write another young adult manuscript, even though that was never something I really wanted to do.
Okay.
So I was like, do I have another story in me? And it turns out, yes, I did. I wrote 12th Night. That was my pandemic book and my pregnancy book. And it was like the hardest book I've ever written because I just had like no brain cells anymore. Um, but uh, but yeah, so that's what I was doing. I was thinking, pretty much the average like mid-list author has to produce one book a year. And I was like, okay, well, I can definitely do that and be a mom at the same time. Because I am very prolific. Um, but then when things went viral, that timeline just like got way compressed, because then it was like, okay, well, we want to re-release the Atlas 6. And I was like, okay, well, people have been waiting years for the second book though. Like, I don't want to make this seem like, I was like, it is important to me that this doesn't look like I've sold out, because I think now it's very common for self-published books to get picked up, but at the time that was like not a thing that happened. Like when my agent and I were talking about it, we were talking about hitting the 50 Shades of Grey number, which is selling like a volume of 10,000. And, so it was so uncommon that I was worried about like whether I would look like a sellout.
Yeah.
And it was important to me. I was like, no, I'm gonna have book two done. We're gonna come out with it right away. We're gonna come out, like, we're not gonna make a big fuss about the Atlas 6 as like a different product. We're gonna come out with book two in the same year. So we had like two crash deadlines. I edited on my phone while my son slept on me. Like it was this total fever dream of a time that was just like, I'm going to get this impossible amount of work done.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter that it's impossible. I'm going to do it. That's what the mental illness is for. um, and so like only now have things begun to, my son is 3 now. And it's only now that I sort of feel like, okay, he's in preschool and I have childcare. Now I have enough time to like really kind of be aware of
Yeah.
the world and my emotions about this sort of thing. But it all happened so fast that it was just like every book since he was born has been a completely different process, just depending on what stage of development he was in, or what, like whether I was able to put him down to sleep or not. And yeah, it's just been kind of trying to juggle everything. And so I've never really lost the feeling of like I've never exited starvation mode. I'm still like producing as much as I humanly can all the time. And so everything changed, but also not really.
Yeah.
That this has always felt like this is my livelihood, you know, in every sense of the word. That like this is what I would be doing whether someone was paying me to do it or not. Although it is very helpful that
Yeah.
someone is paying me to do it.
Talking about the virality of the whole situation and, how that kind of opened the eyes to that your writing of that genre, do you think it was more the sales of the book because of the virality, or do you think it was the virality itself that brought the publisher's eye to that series?
So I do have to say, because I'd had my first publishing deal by this time, I had an agent.
Okay.
So this was I like there are a lot of scams that are targeting aspiring writers right
Yeah.
now. I actually learned at Rose City that some of them use my face to do it, which is very frustrating. Like so frustrating. But so I just like to bring up to people while I have this space
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Go
that,
for it.
you know, some ears, that if you self-publish a book and a publisher approaches you, you should contact an agent immediately. You should not negotiate with the publisher yourself. Contacting an agent at that point is not the same as querying an agent. It's not, you're not sending your manuscript. You just send an email to an agent and you say, I have a contract. I have 24 hours or whatever to make a decision. Can you help me? And the answer will definitely be yes, because money is on the table.
Right. Exactly.
Like an agent will always, you know, yes, they'll take 15%, but an agent only makes money if you make money. So it is always in your best interest to have an agent negotiate for you.
Yeah.
And yes, so I just have to start there. There were some people who were approaching me about, you know, about subreddits, about publishing in other countries. People were asking me to do audio, people were asking me to do hardcovers. I was starting to feel really overwhelmed, and I knew the Atlas Six was a trilogy. I knew it was the first book in a trilogy, so I definitely wanted a traditional publisher
Yeah.
to help me with the rest of the books. And so when I told my agent when I told my agent about the book, she's like, well, what do you want? And I was like, I want to work with a publisher. I don't care if they want me to make changes. That's fine. I don't really even know what's coming next. And so she, once it hit the 50 Shades number, she went on sub with it.
Okay.
So yeah, so that is always an important detail, that like I had like someone advocating for me
Yeah.
through this process.
That's great.
And yeah, and so when we got the preempt from Tor, she called me and she was like, okay, so a preempt is that you get a limited amount of time to consider. And once you accept the preempt, you like are rejecting everybody else. You're not waiting to collect the best offer. If
Right.
someone makes a preempt, that's like kind of their best and final, and you either go with it or you don't, and you wait for something else. But it was like Tor, like
Yeah.
towards the fucking dream.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
so my agent was like, "Do you want to go with Tor?" And I was like, "Absolutely yes." And she's like, "Great, I'm gonna try to get more money. Bye." So it was yeah. I forgot where this question started.
That's okay. Where were you at for, because you're writing both of them kind of, it sounds like, at the same time. The sequel, you're republishing the first one, you're working
Yeah.
on the young adult novel. How was it jumping genres back and forth and trying to keep that straight in your head?
So the thing about fan fiction is that what was so fun about fan fiction was doing like super different AUs each time. And so an
Okay.
AU is an alternate universe. So every time I'd write, it's the same characters, but in a completely different world, which ended up being a different genre. And so for me, I would work on at least 3 fan fictions at a time. And there would always be like, one was a rom-com and one was like a dark dystopian fantasy. And then one would be a murder mystery. And so like to me, fan fiction was an amazing way, not just to get my 10,000 hours and also like the kind, you know, like critical feedback, basically. Like
Right.
the kind of thing that people go to an MFA for. I basically got over 4 million words of fan fiction. Um, and and so I got very accustomed to writing multiple genres at once, because I'm very experimental. I mean, I tend to write in the same genre, but I like to experiment with form or experiment with scope, or like how can we express this narrative in a different way, and shape it in a way that doesn't always feel like a traditional book sometimes. And so I was really influenced by the ability to do whatever I wanted, which is the best part of being in fandom, sort of. Actually, there are rules to fandom. There are actually a lot of rules to fandom, mainly that like you're not supposed to. you're not supposed to make the golden girl the villain. But leaving that aside,
We're gonna have to
at
just
that
have a
point,
whole episode on
yeah,
that, on that whole.
yeah, at that point, I was already pretty accustomed to writing different things and being able to just exist in that world and tell that story and kind of go in and out of. It's pretty hard to it's pretty hard to talk to me when I'm in the middle of drafting. To me, I always say drafting is like the dream space. Like
Yeah,
it's just the dreamscape. You have to have a lot of time. You can't be interrupted. Versus revising takes at least twice as long, but that's the sweat. That's like the work and the problem solving.
yeah.
But as I was writing a book this summer, my husband said something, and I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Oh boy, we're losing mommy." Like, so yeah, so part of it is just that when I'm writing something, I'm not fully present for the others in my life.
Okay. What is your process like? They say you're going to work on a book. You sit down and kind of what's that process look like? Do you come up with an outline, or do you just start typing, or do you just have like an idea floating in your head with notes?
Um, it's pretty funny because with publishing, there are a lot of different ways that you can get a contract, and I have learned that I cannot do a pitch, or like I can't offer a pitch on a book because if I or like try to sell an outline, because once I outline something, that it's almost like a guarantee that that's not what the book will be.
Right.
So I learned that my process is like, even if I do outline, which I don't really, every book is a little bit different. With the
Okay.
Atlas 6, I used what I call a living outline,
All
which
right.
is that. So initially, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't slow. Like when I was writing the Atlas 6, I was really inspired by Westworld in terms of scope. The fact that you're like in this really claustrophobic environment in season 1, and then gradually zoom out and see like the consequences of the world and what the world has done to create something that you like, in season 1, not that you're like, this is great what's happening to these robots, but you're just kind of in, like, that's what you're told that the world is, and so you don't really question it. And then you're like, oh my god, this is so much worse than I imagined, which is what I wanted to be the feeling with the Atlas series. And you're kind of like complicit in book 1, that you're like, yeah, I'm on board with this.
Okay.
And but then I was also really inspired by Kingsman. I wanted the feeling of like that kind of movie, like a little bit campy, but also propulsive in terms of the psychological aspect of it. I wanted to write a psychological thriller. The Secret History is obviously another inspiration as well. And so I didn't want it to be slow. And although I'm sure many people are hearing this and rolling their eyes, but it's fine. Um, so my outline was basically the first, like if you open the Atlas 6 and look at the table of contents, it's like 8 things, and that was my outline. It was just like, here's where like moments are going to happen. Like this is the pulse of the book.
Okay.
And then each time I would get to one of the things, I would break it down into which 4 character points of view we were going to hear from. And then I would write a character and then be like, okay, now let's break down the next character even more. What do we want to accomplish with their perspective? What is important? Why is their perspective the next most interesting one? And so that by the time I was finished, that outline was probably like 8 to 10 pages. But I have not written another book like that since. I tend to, uh, I am I like to say that authors basically, the problems can range from the anxious writer, who's the writer who is like worried, has the kind of like fear of failure aspect, that just like they can't even start writing because they're worried it's not going to come out right, or that what's in their head is not going to be right on the page. And then there's like the ADHD writer who just has so many ideas and can't really focus on
Yeah.
one. And like I fall in more of that camp. So if I know what's happening in the story, I no longer want to write it. And with an outline, you know what's happening in the story, and it becomes
Yeah.
boring to me. So I have learned, and also, gosh, I'm talking so much. I know that that's what I'm here to do, but also I feel like I'm
That's
talking
okay. You make
so
my job
much.
easier. And your enthusiasm shows, like how much you care about this
Thank
and love what
you.
you do. It really shows in the way that you present it and the way that you talk about it. Because sometimes if somebody's like, oh yeah, I did this thing over there, it's like, well, sometimes it feels disingenuous, but we know you're genuine by
Yeah.
how invested you are and how much you want to talk about it. And again, it makes
Thank
my job
you.
easier.
Yeah.
So
I will before I would basically just have an idea and write it, and I would not consult anyone about that idea, and it would just happen. But so after the Atlas 6, I signed a 3-book deal that was basically like 3, I think the contract says 3 works of crossover contemporary sci-fi and fantasy. So basically 3 more The Atlas Sixes, that are standalone novels. And so the first one I wrote of the on that contract was Gifted and Talented. And Gifted and Talented it's coming out in April. It's like basically Succession with magic. Although I was actually inspired by the Royal Tenenbaums. I have not actually watched Succession, so I don't know if that comp is accurate, but I think it probably is. And so yeah, so it's a very science-based magic system. It's basically it's pretty incisive and critical of the time that I spent in tech and the criticisms I have of startups and especially of fraud in tech. Um, but it's mainly a family dramedy. And then I am like that fit pretty well. Like it's very Atlas adjacent. It
okay,
is thematically like the Atlas 6. It's about power and exploitation and potential. And it's tonally closer to Masters of Death, which is another one of my successful books. And then I had the idea for a book called Girl Dinner, which is a satire about a cannibal sorority. And I told my editor about it, and I was just like, yeah, I told my editor, I was like, I really want to write this. I had just finished Gifted and Talented. And I was like, I really want to write a book. I pitched her Girl Dinner, but like jokingly. And I was like, I meant this as a joke. I've now told several people about this joke to the point where I might just commit to the bit and do it. And then I wrote it quite quickly afterward and sent it to her. And she loved it. And I was like, but we don't have a contract for it. Like, it's not sci-fi. Like, I don't know, like, is the speculative element enough? And she was like, it doesn't matter. These contracts are very loose. So, and then when we were talking about what's going to come after this, she was just like, I think you really perform best when you're given a lot of freedom.
yeah,
And so that obviously requires a lot of trust. That's something that wouldn't happen if I hadn't already done a lot of books with the same team.
yeah.
So I'm very, very fortunate in that sense that like I perform best when I have no constraints whatsoever. If I tell my editorial team like, can you just leave me alone for 6 to 8 weeks and I'll bring you something at the end of it.
Yeah.
That's like the ideal way for me to create.
Well, and as an artist, like if you get constraints on you, then it makes it harder sometimes. And I think that's for any art, really.
Yeah. I think there are some authors that like to have the outline that keeps them on track, or they like to have a prompt of some kind. And then for me, it's very much like a don't tell me what to do kind of place. Like, no, I'm gonna write a book based on a meme now.
What is your interaction like with your editors? Because of that,
Um,
if you have a definite like I want it to be like this and they say you should really do it like this, is there butting of heads or is there compromise? How does that work?
yeah, my editor is amazing. My editor is Lindsay Hall at Tor. She is a Hugo winning long form editor. So she's really amazing. She's also T. Kingfisher's editor and Rika Aoki, authors that I really, really admire. And we work very well together. Certainly there is a lot of like, um, Lindsay is a very like soft and cute person. And sometimes I get really mean in the draft. Like when I'm reading her comments and she's like, can we cut this? And I'm like, absolutely not. Um, so we have a very good we have a very good we've come to an understanding of like I don't talk to her in the 48 hours after I've received the editorial letter. Like I have to sit with the criticism and like decide whether I want to push back or not, because some things, yes, I do push back on. Some things are like, no, this is what I meant. Usually when she asks me to cut something, I end up like adding words because I'm like, no, you just don't get it. Making it like clearer, and
Yeah.
theoretically this makes it better, according to her it makes it better. um I do cut things. I do want people to know that I do actually follow instructions. I can be managed, but it is definitely a process of like, we have a great amount of trust in our working relationship. That's just like, I love you, but also I don't understand what the fuck this comment means. So yeah, and it's a really, really great working relationship, and the editor author relationship is extremely important. It's something that I don't think I fully understood, because going into to traditional publishing, you don't always get the privilege of working with the same editor for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's so great to be with someone who's really invested in my career long term, who really understands what I'm trying to do with my oeuvre, and who is also just like, yeah, who's invested in me, and who cares about me, because part of the problem with publishing is that there's a real disconnect between what sales thinks and what, what you think, and what you think a book is. Sales is going to pitch it in the most universal way possible, in the most commercial way possible, and sometimes that's really detrimental to the author, because it means I'm going to get a lot of one-star reviews from people who that book really wasn't meant for.
Yeah.
And so to have an editor who goes to bat for me is like really, really amazing. And when you first start querying and stuff, you think your agent is going to be that person, and true, your agent definitely is, in like in a business sense, but in protecting your creativity, it is really, really great to have an editor who cares a lot that you two are making art together and not just capitalism.
Yeah. Do you think that your love of doing a lot of different things will push you into doing other genres or other age categories going forward? And do you think what kind of names you thinking of? Different names, same names for those?
Yeah, probably. I would keep. I will use Olivie anytime I write for adults. I don't think the genre change is that different, because I think the Olivie quality basically stays the same even if the genre changes.
Okay.
Um, and like a lot of my books, like Alone with You in the Ether, is already pretty defiant of genre in terms of how it relates to my other fantasy books, but it still, I think, has my fingerprints on it.
Okay.
Should I narrate that I'm making like a confused face? That's like, I don't know what to call it.
I,
Um, but
I think you just did
so
narrate it. Just say.
yeah, I to me, expressing like genre divergence is less like, that can be done through the language of cover art. That can be done through like the marketing, or the way that the book is presented as a product. It's the age that is really important, and who the audience is. And I don't think I would ever write for a younger audience. Like I wouldn't go younger than young adult, probably. I mean, who knows? My son is 3 right now, but maybe I'll feel differently when he's in middle school or whatever. I doubt it though. I because I like to do things, because I'm constantly trying to like invent and be innovative. Like, part of the reason, like I said, my imposter syndrome is very bad. And so part of the reason I don't have to question whether or not I deserve to be here is, it's like, well, it doesn't matter if I just continue to do something new and weird, and like, to just, if I'm robbing the bank right now, then rob the bank. Like, just keep doing weirder and more differenter things. And so that's hard to do with an inexperienced reader. That's hard to do with a young reader.
Yeah.
And because you have an obligation. When I write for teenagers, I feel that I have an obligation to present the world as a good place that has good people in it, and that has a certain expectation that you will get good things if you're a good person. But I know that that's not true.
Yeah.
So my adult work definitely carries a little bit more of a nihilistic quality. But I am, over the summer I wrote a book, it's a gothic that's set in LA, and I was talking to Rika Aoki, who I mentioned earlier. She's
Yeah.
the author of Light from Uncommon Stars. And I was telling her the problems I was having with this manuscript. I was just like, it's in its first draft form, and it is terrible. And I was just telling her I just kept changing my mind about what the characters were like and what was going on. And she was like, it sounds like you're trying to write a horror novel and you just don't know how to do that yet. And I was like, you nailed it, Rika. That's it. So yeah, I now that I know to lean more into the horrific aspect of the romance than the romantic part. Now I have a better vision of what the book is. But yes, so the point being that I expect to constantly push myself and what I'm capable of and what I write, and I hope that I continue to produce things that feel different from each other.
Yeah, for sure. Are you still doing fan fiction? I gotta ask. I gotta ask if you're still
Yeah,
doing it
yeah.
on the side, just for yourself, just for funsies.
I feel that there will be a right time to like venture back to my AO3. You can still find everything I've ever written on AO3 under Olivie Blake. It's on fanfiction.net too, but some of the stuff, like if you want everything, it's on AO3. The last thing I wrote was a Rebecca fan fiction where Max is a serial killer, which I was pretty proud of that one. It was pretty good. And I also wrote some like supernatural Jane Austen. I don't engage with my original fandom because the source material has gotten problematic. I used to write Harry Potter fan fiction, and I can't really.
Yeah.
I don't want to partake in that imagination anymore.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that anymore. But certainly, I always joke slash threaten that I'm going to write the cave scene from Cushion's Start by Jacqueline Carey, because Jacqueline Carey is a closed door romance author, and I would love to open that door really wide and walk into it. And also, I joke that I'm going to write some revenge fanfic for Downton Abbey for when Edith like keeps taking her baby from all these women, and I think they should burn her house down.
My wife would love that.
Thank you.
So this last May, 12th Night came out.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us a little bit about that? Give us a little detail on that story for the people that may have missed it.
Yes. So, yes, 12th Night is my young adult novel. It's my celebration of girls in fandom and gaming. It's a remix. I call it a remix on Shakespeare's 12th Night. And I wanted to write because it was a pandemic, and it was hard to create. It was very, very hard to create because I like couldn't leave my one bedroom apartment that I had discovered was disgusting. I think a lot of us went through that. Um, I wanted to write something that gave me the feeling of like 10 Things I Hate About You. That was a major, major inspiration. I wanted to write something that felt like, or Clueless is another good example. She's the Man is the obvious example, but I didn't rewatch She's the Man just because I try when I'm doing an adaptation, I try not to like be with the source material too closely, because then I think you want to like mimic the beats.
Right.
So I didn't do that, and I didn't reread 12th Night, and I just decided, I was like, what if, Viola in the play is a stranger seeking safety, and so in order to be safe, she disguises herself as a man. So in the book, I was like, what if Vi is a young woman on the internet, and she's trying to be safe in these gaming communities, and she loves RPGs, she loves tabletop gaming, she also loves this MMORPG, so an online game called 12th Night, which is Arthurian inspired. And she loves this game, she loves the world, but she's experienced some abuse online, and the boys that she plays very thinly veiled D&D with, like, don't respect her opinions. I actually, when I was writing this, I asked on my Tumblr, I live on Tumblr, if anyone had ever had a negative experience with a predominantly masculine D&D group. And so a lot of the stories a lot of the things that happen to Vi and the way she's treated and all these various microaggressions come from real stories from my readers who are gamers.
Yeah.
And so I was like, that's an interesting angle. I was obviously not going to approach the possibility of body dysmorphia being like played for laughs. That was never going to be a thing. But it was like, but what if she takes on a masculine form online, because that's a way that she can be in this place and do this thing that she loves without feeling like she's in danger. But then, of course, the boy she hates, who is, a football star, and he is totally irresponsible. And of course, this is the Duke Orsino character, whose name is Jack in my book. He gets injured, and he also falls into playing this MMORPG, and they run into each other in the game, and he doesn't know that it's her. So they play together online, and they start to slowly get along in real life. And it's a very sweet romance, actually, because I am, I'm what I like to call an unlikable female character. I certainly was in high school. I always joke that like the bitch is a very underrepresented character in fiction. And you know, there are lots of books that claim to be like, oh, this is a bitchy character, and sure, she's ambitious or she's strong or whatever, but it's because she cares about her little sister, or she's secretly a cinnamon roll, or like, you know, it's for some other, you know, there's it's kind of it's like the villain with the heart of gold. It's the same thing. And I was
Yeah.
like, but you know, like sometimes you're just interpreted as a bitch. Sometimes you're just treated as a bitch, and you take that on because it's what people have told you you are. And I think that was me as a high school girl. I was angry, I was impatient, I didn't understand why people treated me like I was incompetent. And so to be able to write a young woman like that was very freeing. And knowing that people would be like, she's unlikable was kind of part of it.
Yeah. But also, I'm sure people can identify with that too. There's a
Yeah,
lot
it
of
has been.
people, there have been previous authors that have mentioned that in the past, that they like those are their kind of characters because it's identifiable for a lot of the same reasons. Different stories completely, of course, but yeah, it's awesome, and I like to hear that the all of the topics that you're covering in that book sound just amazing and great. And as a person who comes from a heavy role playing background, we mentioned that in the past, having those things pointed out is huge because I've seen it myself, and I'm glad it's never been in the groups that I've been in, but I've seen it in other groups, and it's horrifying to me, and it bugs me. It gets me irritated, and it
Yeah.
bugs me to see
I
that.
I do want to emphasize that I don't think a work is truly feminist if it doesn't also show a wide variety of masculine personalities. And so that was one thing that my husband was really grateful for, that like the jocks weren't the bad guys, like just
Yeah,
universally the bad guys,
yeah,
and the nerds were just universally good guys, that there was a real mix of like the point of the story, spoiling a little bit, that you know the book is, it's bookended by these two D&D games, and in the first one she's completely disregarded, she's completely disrespected in this community that is like the only one she turns to, and then in the end she kind of puts together all her friends that have these surprise shared interests, that there's all these people that she didn't think she could be friends with, but you know, after she's gone through this journey and accepted that there are like, yes, lots of people want you to fail, but the people who want you to succeed are more important, that she then has like a much healthier and better experience. And so the point is not that like these masculine communities are bad, but that you just have to find the right ones, or that
yeah,
you just have to find a place, like there is a difference between being respected and just identifying something on gender lines purely.
yeah. You mentioned you got the other book, Gifted and Talented. You mentioned that a little bit earlier.
I
And
did,
when
yes.
does that come out?
So that is April 1st. That one is, she is thick. That is that's a big book, and it's about these siblings that come together for their father's funeral, and they don't know which one is going to inherit the Magitech like money and the company, but they're also having little private magical problems.
Okay,
So
okay, okay, awesome. Any other books? Any other projects you got? You're brewing up, coming out with?
yeah, so shortly, October, January is my story anthology comes out. That's just a collection of stories that I've written over like the last 8 years. So some of them are like, you know, quote unquote cult classics. If I have a cult, which hopefully I do, then they are familiar with those with those stories. About half of those, and then half are new, and were really really fun. It was the first time I wrote about motherhood and stuff like that. There's, you know, obviously demons, of course, vampires, and then yeah, and then we said that's October. April is Gifted and Talented, and then October is Girl Dinner.
Awesome. And I,
Yeah.
I still have a girl dinner. And then when you said what it was, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that one.
That's
I'm
great.
pretty excited about it.
You've got some upcoming events, appearances. September 29th, you're going to be at the Brooklyn Book Festival in Brooklyn, correct?
Yes, yes, yeah. I'm really excited about it. I'm also doing a panel with ML Rio, who her novella Graveyard Shift is a great one, and I recommend it.
Awesome. October 9th, the Harrisburg Book Festival in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
October 13th, the Novel Neighbor, which I believe is a bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, one of my favorite indie bookstores. I'm doing that event with Alexene Farol, who I also really love. You should definitely read Starling House for fall. It's a good fall book.
Okay. October 19th through 20th, you're going to be at the New York Comic Con.
Yeah.
Are you excited for that?
Yeah. I'm so excited. It usually tour sends the West Coast authors to San Diego Comic Con and the East Coast authors to New York Comic Con. But for some reason, TJ Klune and I are on a panel together. Like I hesitate to even call it a panel. TJ Klune and I are going to talk to each other at New York Comic Con, and you're allowed to come listen.
I love that.
We make for a pretty interesting conversation. I think the last time we did a panel together at Comic-Con, people referred to us as like Barbenheimer in person, in which he's Barbie. So come on.
So your social medias, they can find you at. Oh, and I got to read the name of the website addresses, and
The cocktail is two, or not Olivie enough, is how Katrina Ward told me I should say it. But yeah, so it's olivieblake.com.
Right. Awesome. So guys, go and check that out as well. Instagram.
Alexene.
What's that? Yeah. Farol Follmuth.
Yes. Okay. Let me do that.
Yeah. Instagram and Instagram, Twitter. Give us your social media handles.
Yeah.
Tumblr, all that. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm listening.
I'm mostly Olivie Blake everywhere, except I don't have a Facebook, and lots of people are impersonating me on Facebook. So if I talk to you on Facebook, it's not me. But Instagram and Twitter and Tumblr and Spotify, Olivie Blake. And then Instagram and Twitter for young adult stuff, Farol Follmuth.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for doing that for me, because I'm like, wait a second, I have to do this part that I failed at the beginning, and now I'm double worrying about it, and oh no, my audience is gonna hate me.
It's fine. I got you. It's okay.
I appreciate that. Everybody that's listening, please go and check out all of her stuff. It's amazing, awesome. It's been so much fun chatting with you. I appreciate you being here. And in just a short minute, we're going to get to our live stream Q&A questions. So anybody who's in the live stream, throw your questions in the chat, and we will get to them in just a moment. Coming up, we're going to have author John Jackson Miller is going to be joining us. He wrote novels for Star Wars, Star Trek, Halo, and his new Batman novel that it kind of ties into the Michael Keaton universe. So we're definitely going to want to check that out. That's going to be live September 23rd. Podcast available September 24th. Also down the road, author and game designer Jebediah Berry. He's going to be joining us as well. Voice actor, RPG game master Mark Mears is going to be joining us. So all kinds of people. We've got a long list coming up. We're all the way out till December on our list. So definitely stay tuned. Make sure to rate, review, follow, subscribe on all of the platforms. Whatever you do to support the show, it also supports these amazing guests. So thank you so much for being here. Take care, everyone. Have a good one, and we will see you next time down the road right here on Epic Realms.